housing backgrounder that I put together when we first started into this to make the case for doing it. And one of the things that I thought was worth profiling was that when we did some research back in the early 90s, we found out that 82% of women and 62% of men in regular market rental housing in the town of Antigonish are paying more than 30% of their take-home pay towards their shelter costs, which is what CMHC says you ought not to be doing. You should be paying less than 30%. Well, right now the food bank's serving around 700 people. We know that the average market rents in Antigonish are between $600 and $1,200 a month, depending on the size of the dwelling, and we know that anybody who's getting welfare, which would be people with long-term disabilities, single parents, and people who are struggling in between seasonal employment, underemployment, people who are on EI, well, they would be a separate set of circumstances, but anybody who's having to rely on welfare in Antigonish, and there are, what, about 350 cases, or?
It's about 600 files.
600 files, which means households, could be an individual, could be a family of 6. This is the amount of people who are struggling along. The shelter allowance for people on welfare is if you're a single individual with a disability, or if you're older than 55, or if you're escaping family violence, you would get around $535 a month. Well, we know that the rents start at around $6 and go up from there. We're going to get a 5-year plan on the ground to have, at the end of this process, a complex where there's 10 units of affordable housing built, which is just scratching the surface, but anyway. And it's going to be green, and we're going to have community gardens, and it's going to be a whole, socially worthy thing to do, and very good for the people living in it. Once we got into it, we started saying, well, why wouldn't we just build 10 units? Why wouldn't we have a plan to kind of go on building? Because we do need way more than 10 units. And how are we going to get around this problem of the withdrawal of the federal government from resource groups who oversaw the development? Like, you can have a housing society that owns and operates their new housing complex, but you can't manage the thing. You can't do all the developmental work without somebody to do it. And it's too much for just a small group of volunteers. So how do you get around that problem? So we figured out that if we had our feet in 2 different spots, one would be affordable housing provision with all of what we could tap into to make that happen, and the other being development of social enterprise with all of what we could tap into there. We could get like a locus of like a critical mass of activity where we could draw resources to, turn it all into a plan to just keep on building housing over many years, hopefully. So we have a 5-year plan because that's what we started off thinking. And we have a housing society that we've set up. We've gone around and tested the need in the communities for, where is housing needed and for whom, and what kinds of assets does each locality have to put to the task of building housing. So that's the nuts and bolts of what our project proposal said we were going to do. And we were going to do this increasing collaboration and, doing all the things that building community capacity, building relationships, developing leadership in the community. Of course, those would all be the undercurrents, very important undercurrents of what we did. So we've got all these things in place. We need a treasurer. We have an application in for a grant to do a market study so that we could figure out if our business ideas are doable, or do we have to reorient. And we're at the point where we've got the buttons all lined up and we can press all the buttons at the right time. So that's the magic to the 9-legged race I've discovered. Get everything all into place, and just don't turn the lights on until you've got the last most important pieces in place, and then you can flick the switch. So we're just at the point now where we've started the first year, implementing the first year plan of our first year of our 5-year plan, and as soon as we've got the treasurer in place and a few other things, we can flick the switch and off we go. And it's really exciting, and it could really have a large effect in Antigonish, but the main learning, of course, was relationships. It's all just about relationships. That's your key to moral support, tangible support, and to breaking down the resilience of the status quo, as it was so eloquently put this morning.